I am at Stone Vineyards here in the Finger Lakes on Seneca Lake. Look at this. Oh my gosh, it is beautiful here. Beautiful fall day. Stone has been around. They were one of the very first wineries here in the Finger Lakes to grow Chardonnay and vinifera, along with Dr. Frank and Hermann J Weimer, which is just right across the river there. And Hermann J Weimer now owns this beautiful vineyard here, Standing Stone. So, something really unique that I want to talk to you about or educate people about is about honey. So did you know that grape vines get flowers, and then comes the grapes? And you would think with the massive amount of acreage of grapevines grown that you could actually go and buy grape honey, because bees would be here pollinating, cross-pollinating, doing their things and making honey. But the reality is that the majority of vineyards across the world, all over everywhere, are not organic, and they don't attract the bees. The bees will not come to crops that are heavily sprayed. Here at Standing Stone and across at Hermann Weimer, they actually specialize in biodynamic organic agriculture. So they actually make honey here. They make grape blossom honey. You can come to the vineyard here and buy their grape blossom honey from those vineyards right there. Hermann J Weimer came here a few years ago, the company, the vineyard, and started growing everything organic and biodynamic. And thus came the honey as a result.
Beautiful about the Finger Lakes as a region is that it doesn't matter where you are. You can make the same grape in a different spot and you will get a different style wine. The difference between this Gewürztraminer and the Gewürztraminer you had previously is the one is like over here and the other one is across the road. But even in that short little distance of gap, everything changes. We always have respectively referred to the vineyard up there as our dynamite vineyard. One, we think it makes dynamite wines, but that's a little too on the nose. Originally, it was actually because when they first planted the vineyard, the soil was so rocky and so dense that to plant this, they had to auger holes into the ground and drop quarter sticks of dynamite down there to blow out the soil profile. So you have a much more mineral-driven style of soil. This creates a wine that's a little bit more restrained. So what you see with this is that there are less nutrients. The grapes get slightly less ripe than if you put them on like a limestone like down here. This is gonna give you a little bit more acid balance and a little more restraint. It's almost oxymoronic to call a Gewürztraminer restrained. And it very much, in very many ways, is still Gewürztraminer. It's floral, it's pretty, it's perfumey. It's just a little less than the 19. This also is one of the very few Gewürztraminers we do in oak, so this is gonna have a little bit of oak in the fermentation and in the aging process. So it's a different approach on Gewürztraminer. Gewürztraminer in the Finger Lakes is a tricky grape to grow, and you don't see it grown very often. It's why Cornell has made hybrids like Treminette and Arundel, because we are right on the edge of the window climate-wise that you can grow Gewürztraminer. So in the best vintages and the best sites, you can grow Gewürztraminer. That's why we grow it here. This site is one of the most winter protected in the entire Finger Lakes, because we have one, a full view of the lake, and two, we have a constant slope from here to the house you see up there. So you get all of the warm air breezes coming up the lake in the winter. So it allows us to make Gewürztraminer, but it also allows us to make enough Gewürztraminer that we can play with style and make something slightly differently from the same grape on the same property. So I'll let you guys enjoy that. Characteristic to them. The other really cool thing about this wine is it shows you something that like I find really fascinating. I'm gonna apologize. I'm gonna get just a hair geekier than normal on this. We do all of our fermentations using indigenous yeast. So there's two ways to make wine. You can either use the yeast that are naturally on the grape, or you can basically, when you get the fruit in, hit it with a little bit of sulfur and then add some commercial strain of yeast. Think of like what you use to make breads in those little packets, just on a much larger scale.
California wine.
Exactly. Sorry, I'm not allowed to say that. They make great wines. So we do everything indigenously. So on the grapes themselves, there's between 100 and 150 different species of yeast living on the grape skin at any time. Each yeast makes different flavors in the wines. Yeast is almost as responsible for the flavors in wine as the grapes themselves. So if we have 100 different species acting on a grape, we get 100 different flavors for that first, like maybe 10% of fermentation, and then the main yeast takes over. Whereas if you commercially inoculate, you get one dominant flavor in the wine. So what's cool is this wine, each of these blocks have different microbiomes. They have different yeast growing on them. So I have spent a lot of time talking about soil and topology and all of these different aspects. But what you also is really, really important is what is growing around them. This idea of biodynamics is all about holistic agriculture and cultivating an ecosystem around the grapevine to help and create a more site-specific, terroir-driven style of wine. So when you look at this wine, the 3 grapes are all grown on this property, but each one has different components doing the fermentation. So I will let you guys sit with that. Now Merlot is an interesting grape in the Finger Lakes because one, Merlot is technically classified as a Pinot. Pinot and Cabernet, other than being words that we use in certain grape varieties like Pinot Noir, Cabernet Franc, actually have meaning. They are a designate of cluster structure. So the really tight conical clusters you see, those are Pinots. The loose flowing ones are Cabernets. So Riesling is technically a Cabernet. Merlot is technically a Pinot. So you have a little bit of a tighter cluster, a little harder to grow on the East Coast. The other thing that's important about Merlot is that it requires a much, much longer growing season. You know, one of the reasons you're going to see a lot of Cabernet Francs in the Finger Lakes is it takes about 120 to 125 days to ripen. Merlot takes anywhere from 140 to 150. These longer ripening periods make it so, one, we have to be a lot more site specific. And we have to be very careful about where we grow these and how we grow these to make sure that we get the right amount of ripeness in the fruit to make a quality one. The second one is something like Merlot is very vintage dependent. We rarely make a single variety Merlot unless we know we can pull it off. The reason that this wine is so special is that this is the first vintage we've done a single variety Merlot in at least as long as I've been here. I want to say 6 or 7 years, because the conditions were perfect to make a Merlot this year. The other thing about this Merlot is that, you know, kind of an interesting tidbit. If you ever get this on Jeopardy though, I expect, you know, a little check on the side. Merlot is actually named after a bird. When Merlot was first propagated and cultivated, there was a bird that would come in and loved this grape. It would fly over grapes to get to Merlot. And it was a gray-chested robin-looking thing. But they ended up naming it after that bird. So there is both a bird and a grape called Merlot. So I always thought that was interesting. A little bit of Hungarian oak in this one just to kind of balance out the flavor. Full malolactic, cut a little bit of the acidity. But I'll let you guys enjoy this. Research obsession for a while. But Saperavi is the oldest grape we have record of in the world. It is 6,000 years old, you know, give or take a couple hundred years. But it originates from the Georgia. Country, not state. State doesn't make great wines, trust me on this one. But the country, really, really good. So one of the cool things about Saperavi is that it is classified as what the French call a teinturier. Winemaking jargon, I know, but what this means is if you look at all red grapes, Cabernet Franc, Pinot Noir, Cabernet Sauvignon, all of them have red skins and white pulp. What happens is when you do your fermentation, crush the grapes up, the color from the skins is extracted into the white pulp, and over time you get red wine. Saperavi is red skin, red pulp. So these grapes are tinted all the way through. It's what gives it its noticeable and distinctive, really, really dark color. These wines are as dark as you can get them. The word Saperavi in Georgian actually means to stain or to dye. So D-Y-E, not D-I-E. But they actually used it as clothing dye in like the Middle Ages. So a lot of them had like purple coloring clothes from Saperavi. This grape is extremely influential. It's interesting to look at it grow. Because it's so old, it's almost a look into the past. The cluster structures are slightly different than what you see. I mean, if you look at society as a whole, we have been planting and domesticating grapes for 6,000 years. And over time, we've been cultivating them and breeding them and adjusting them to get the perfect variety. And the most recent one we've done this with is Cabernet Sauvignon. So if you compare Cabernet Sauvignon to Saperavi, you're looking at all the little tinkerings and all the little adjustments that mankind has made over the last 6,000 years. And the cool thing about it is, this is 6,000 years old, but it's still amazing. They did a really, really good job with it. This wine here, really bold, really dark, really, really good dark fruit characteristics. We do about a 20% stem inclusion in this, and do about a 20% Hungarian oak fermentation and aging in this. Of course. Correct. Correct.
For a certain period of time to let it ferment.
Yep. So stems have extra tannins, and well, stems create a little bit of a tension in a wine. So stems do two things. One, you get the extra tannin extraction from the stems. If you ever bite a stem, they're very, very bitter. A lot of tannin in wine comes from stems. Syrah, for example, out of either Washington or the Rhone, do a lot of stem inclusion. So it gives us a lot of tannins. The other thing it does is it cools down the fermentation. So when you do a red wine fermentation, you get all of the skins rising to the top over time, and underneath that, all the heat of fermentation gets trapped in, and you can ferment wines, California reds or some of these reds are fermented from 80 to 90 degrees. This gives you really good color extraction. It also will blow off a lot of your fruity aromas because they'll just kind of evaporate out of the tank. So by doing a stem inclusion, you create air pockets and channels for the heat air to dissipate. So you slow down the fermentation. So you get a tension in the wine between really, really strong, powerful tannins and these kind of lighter, fruitier characteristics as well. So that's kind of one of the tools winemakers have to solidify color, give more tannins, and give more fruit, is to do a stem inclusion. Rarely will you ever see a full stem inclusion because that gets mouth-dryingly, toothily bitter.
Question, Mark.
Yeah.
You say a full stem. You mean like the whole stem?
My apologies. What I mean by that is how much of the grapes are you putting the stems in? So when I say 20% stem inclusion, 20% of the grapes that go into that fermenter have their stems.
How long have you had Saperavi here?
So we have had since the mid-90s.
Mid-90s, okay.
So,
Did you get it from Georgia or it came from local?
so it came from Dr. Frank. Dr. Frank brought it over from Georgia, and then we propagated it. So we did the same thing with the Saperavi that we did with the Riesling. So this block you see on your right when you were pulling in, and on your left when you're leaving up the driveway, that's all Saperavi. And it's the same thing. We planted it over time down the slope. So you have, the original planting in the early 90s all the way down. We actually have the largest planting of Saperavi in the world outside of Georgia. The country of Georgia. Good clarification. The other thing that we're really excited about is Fred just bought some Qvevri or clay pots. So next year's Saperavi will have a traditional clay pot fermentation with this as well.